All right, it seems like folks are sort of trickling in slowly, possibly a product of what a gorgeous day it is today. But I think we'll go ahead and get started and allow people to join at their own pace. My name's Liberty, and I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective. Today, we're going to be excited to host two writers, Lola Phoenix and Laura Boyle, to discuss emotional tools for non-monogamy. In case you haven't been to a Firestorm event before, I'll start off by mentioning a little background. We're a almost 17-year-old radical bookstore owned and operated by a queer feminist collective, and we're located in Southern Appalachia on the land of the Cherokee people. Firestorm does a lot of events in person. I think today this is actually one of three events we're doing, which is a little goofy, but it's the only virtual one we're doing today. And we really like to do the online events because it does give us an opportunity to connect with folks at a distance and is inclusive of folks in our own community here in Western North Carolina for whom there's barriers for in-person events. So thanks so much for taking time out of your beautiful day to be here with us. Just a quick note that we are using Zoom's webinar, which has a Q&A tool as well as an open chat. And I would definitely encourage you to use both or either of those. If you have questions for the panel, the speakers today, do please put those in the Q&A tool. It's easier to keep track of them there. And we'll have some space at the end of the event for Q&A. I would love to have your questions. Make it more fun to hear from you. So without further ado, I think we should go ahead and get started, and I'll just introduce Lola and Laura. Lola Phoenix is an American-born writer living in Stockholm, so joining us from quite a few time zones away. In addition to the Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, Lola's the creator of the Non-Monogamy Journal, which I actually have a copy of right here, and does a weekly advice column and podcast called Non-Monogamy Help. Lola is also an amateur strongman athlete who has a special interest in fitness and nutrition, and we're really jazzed to have you here, Lola.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yay. Laura Boyle is the author of Monogamy in This Economy, which has an incredible title. It's a review of research on polyamorous families and their logistical, financial, and child-rearing choices. She's herself been non-monogamous for at least 20 years and raises her two children under 12 with her polycule in the northeastern United States. So we've got a lot of experience and thoughtful folks in the room today. I'm going to go ahead and pass off to you, Lola. I'll also share in the chat a link to our calendar and where you can find books by both Laura and Lola.
Cool. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I think what we're going to do is go through a couple of the subjects that we touched on in the description of the event. And Laura's going to help me kind of prompting some of the questions there. And Laura, you can give yourself as well a little bit of a more introduction if you want. But yeah, definitely if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And whether the general questions or individual questions about your particular situation, we're more than happy to address them, both like with my experience and as well with Laura's experience.
Yeah, so I'm really pleased to be here and to get to talk about these things a little more. I think both Lola and I do a lot of writing and talking about sort of the more practical ways that people end up approaching non-monogamy, as opposed to like in a big, vague theoretical sense. Because as much as that's fun, people actually have to have relationships, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the big questions that we get a lot when working with people, primarily who are new to non-monogamy, but also throughout their journeys in these kinds of relationships. So one of the big things that comes up a lot is the topic of jealousy. Why, Lola, is jealousy one of these big things that people are afraid of that comes up over and over?
The theme that I kind of see quite often with a lot of people is two things. One is being really, really afraid of the big emotions and really wanting to prevent themselves from experiencing those big emotions. And I think that the reason why jealousy kind of tends to be the first thing that people ask about and they think about is because that's kind of the only context for which that they've been exposed to any kind of non-monogamy, right? Like it's cheating, or that's kind of the first thing that they think about is like, oh, I'll be jealous, because that is definitely like the only sort of cultural script that's been given when there's been any kind of situation of having more than one person you're interested in or having more than one partner. So it makes sense that that's the thing that people really gravitate to. And I think that there's the kind of impetus to go, okay, there's this big emotion. I don't want to experience it. How do I not feel this way? And that's kind of like a big thing that people ask, like, how do I stop this feeling? How do I not feel this way? And I kind of encourage people to rethink it and think about, like, do you ask, how do I not feel sadness in life? How do I not feel happiness in life? How do I not feel angry in life? Like, there's only so much of an avoidance of an emotion that you can experience. And I do think like the polyamory community, especially online, is getting much and much better than it used to be. Like I used to feel like the only ways that people talked about jealousy was like, I used to be jealous, but I'm not now. I'm fine. I've sort of purged it from my system and everything, and I think that made people feel even worse because I think a lot of people, they're looking for a reason or a sign that this is for them or this isn't for them. Like they don't know. And jealousy is one of those things that they kind of pay a lot of attention to. And so when a lot of other polyamorous people are kind of going like, yeah, I was jealous, but I'm not anymore, they kind of feel this pressure within themselves that like, okay, the sign of me not being really polyamorous is whether or not I'm jealous. And in my experience, sometimes the pressure to not feel jealousy is so much more uncomfortable than jealousy actually is. And sometimes in a lot of situations, I would end up feeling so scared that I was going to be jealous that it made me so uncomfortable that I might as well have been jealous anyway. So I think that it makes a lot of sense. Like it's the biggest feeling that they can think of that they're scared of. It's the best way that they can conceive of it. It's something that's reasonable to be afraid of and reasonable to want to address. And so it's the first thing that comes up. But I think whenever I when that's like the first thing that comes up for people, I would say, expect that you're going to feel jealous at some point, right? Like I would also say, expect that you're going to feel sad at some point, expect that you're going to be angry at some point. Like it's an emotion, you're going to experience it more likely than not, right? So rather than asking like, how do I stop this from happening or how do I prevent this from happening, think about it instead of like, okay, if I do feel this, what am I going to do in response? Like, what is it telling me? What is it, what can I learn from it? Because I don't think that it's always like another thing that used to be kind of thought of when it comes to jealousy, especially in the polyamory community, that it's like a sign of insecurity, or it's a sign that there's something wrong with you and you need to fix it. And then once you've fixed it, then everything will be fine. And that's definitely not always the case. Like it's not always the case that jealousy is immediately because of insecurity or immediately because of something that you're doing wrong or that you need to work out. Sometimes it's a sign that there's things that are going on that need to be addressed. And the worst thing that I think you can do, which is something I did, which is assume that any negative emotion you have is jealousy, push it down and just be like, oh, I just need to ignore it and get over it because it's just jealousy. And I don't want to experience it. So I'm just going to push it down and ignore it. When actually it could be a very valid sign. So yeah, that's one of the things I think why people kind of super focus on it. And I do think that it makes sense. I don't want anybody to feel bad if that's like the thing that they talk about when they think about polyamory or the first thing that comes to mind. But I really want people to, instead of thinking like, how can I stop this from happening, to assume that it's probably going to happen at some point, and then how do you actually deal with it?
Yeah, I think for a lot of folks, because monogamy is so heavily defined by exclusivity or where that exclusivity sits or doesn't sit, the feeling that that might shift comes with a lot of these strong negative feelings or these strong feelings of possession, and possession then comes with a lot of jealousy. But also, I think we decide that it's okay to feel jealousy in other areas of our lives, but with non-monogamy, decide that it's suddenly not okay to feel it about our romantic relationships in any capacity. Like we can feel envious of our work colleagues that are doing better than us and use that as a driver for different ways of behaving or different ways of achieving, but we can't see that as a possibility in any other area of our lives somehow. And so I think being willing to sort of visualize jealousy as a kind of like check engine light, a thing where we can pause and see, use ourselves as like human code scanners and try to figure out what's underneath that. And whether that is an insecurity thing that we might or might not be working on in ourselves, or an issue of a need not being met in the relationship in question, or whatever that we can then address with our partner, maybe, is a lot more productive than just seeing jealousy as this is a big, scary emotion that must go away and we must shut down as quickly as possible.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's definitely, I think, people's first reaction, as you were saying. And I think also we have a human tendency to say these negative emotions are much worse than our emotions that we've decided are characterized as positive. And so we want to push them down. Are there other feelings outside of this one of jealousy that we hyper focus on that you think perhaps people don't anticipate as they move into non-monogamy that people frequently experience?
I think one of the things people don't really consider is like, it's always about like, oh, I'm going to be scared when my partner's interested in somebody else. I'm going to be scared when they're dating somebody else. But one thing that people don't really kind of underestimate a little bit is having to sit in the discomfort of saying no to a partner or a date. And that being something that, you know, not being able to sit in the idea that somebody's unhappy with you is something that is really, really difficult. And if you're not able to sit in that, you're going to really, really struggle to make decisions because, you know, as I said, it doesn't matter what kind of polyamory you practice. You are choosing a situation where you get less time with someone than you would typically get within a monogamous relationship, depending on that relationship. So you're going to have to make decisions about your time. And there's only so much kind of leeway of saying yes to everyone that you can do. And there's only 24 hours in a day. Most of us, and that's one of the reasons why the title of your book is so awesome, is because like there's a lot of demands on our time just to live. So you're going to have to make decisions and you're going to have to stand by those decisions and you're going to have to vocalize those decisions to people. And I think that that's often something that people don't really think about. They're kind of, if they're not thinking about the kind of, oh no, I'm going to have these big scary feelings. And it's like, oh, I'm going to have 3 partners or 10 partners and it's going to be awesome. And it's like, it's not necessarily that it's not awesome, but you're going to have to make decisions about your time and you're going to have to stand by those decisions. And sometimes it's not going to be easy to make those decisions. And I do think that that comes into play in monogamy at times, but I think people, they have those scripts in monogamy, like they have TV shows and they have things and examples that they've been given where they've had to make decisions, like where one of their best friends is like lost a parent or something like that. And all of a sudden really needs their help. And they maybe say no to a date night so that they can go support a friend. Like we have those scripts. And then when it's a friend, it's a little bit different of a context socially in monogamy. Whereas like in non-monogamy, we don't have any of these scripts and you kind of like rely on that. You can't really rely on the sort of common sense, if you know, more or less of a situation and where you can make your decision. And if you've done anything like go and Reddit our relationships, or you know, listen to Dan Savage's podcast, listen to any relationship advice podcast, you know, or any kind of you know, like the Smosh videos of like reading our relationships, there's a lot of kind of commonsensical things that come into play with monogamy that, you know, most people can kind of agree on. There are a little bit of gray areas now and then, but there's not really anything like that in non-monogamy. You don't really have this kind of backing. And I think it's very easy to forget. You spend your whole life in a monogamous centric culture. You spend your whole life watching films, watching TV shows. Like there are games you play as a child to figure out like who you're gonna marry and what kind of house you're gonna be in. Like your whole mindset of how relationships are structured and functioned is very much focused on monogamy. So you really have no backing for even conceptualizing this. So I think when people are put in that position of like, now I have to make decisions about my schedule, now I have to say no to people, now I have to stand in my decision, I think that's where it becomes really tricky. And especially if you are, it's like, let's face it, it's depending on the person, but a lot of people are already going to be in a monogamous relationship when they discover polyamory. Like I hope that becomes less and less the case. I don't necessarily want the whole world to be polyamorous. That's not what I'm trying to achieve. But I want people to have the option. I want people to know that this is an option for them. I don't want people to choose monogamy because it's the only option that's ever been presented to them and they don't know any better. But a lot of people are going to be in a monogamous relationship whenever they decide that they want to try polyamory. And especially when two people are in a monogamous relationship, they're used to operating in a very specific way that they take for granted. And they don't really realize when they then have other partners, oh, I'm actually making these decisions based off of a monogamous relationship and not really realizing that that's impacting my decisions. So yeah, I think like the big unexpected thing that I'd say that catches a lot of people off guard is that if it's not, they expect jealousy, they expect to some extent to feel bad. Even though I think when you interact with the polyamory community, you start to believe, I call it like the polyamory PhD, where you do like 6 months of reading and you think you're going to be fine and you're not going to have any negative emotions. But if it's not those things, then it's definitely having to say no to people and having to stand by to your decisions and having to make decisions about your time that I think people really, really underestimate.
So I would agree that for some people, that's definitely the hardest thing or the most unexpected thing. I think for lots of people, the thing that they don't expect is they expect some negative emotions around sort of early dates their partners are going to take or something like this, but they think it's going to happen once with the first set of people their partners see or the first time their partners do things. And they assume that they will magically, in one fell swoop, go on a clear pattern of growth past which all things will be available and open to them in a very simplified way, right? And they assume that they and their partners will have the same trajectory and that things will be equally easy or hard for them as people because they came into this at the same time as partners who knew one another, right?
Yeah.
And they don't anticipate that as different individuals, they're going to have different individual experiences of non-monogamy, or that in meeting different individuals and having different non-monogamous relationships with people who are at different places in their polyamorous or non-monogamous journeys, they're going to have different experiences with those external partners that shift the way they each respond to things. Because, for example, if one of you gets involved with someone who has a like heavily entangled relationship network, and your partner who you came into non-monogamy with thinks that's kind of cool. I'm okay with meeting this other person and their extended network. This kind of feels friendly and welcoming. This is good. I feel embraced by this. But you then, when they meet someone who wants to keep things a little parallel, who's sort of solo poly, who prefers not to entangle everybody, and who's like, oh, well, I just want to have date nights with you once a week. That might feel threatening or isolating or like your partner is going away. And so you two might have very different reactions to a very similar sort of timeline of you meet someone, you start going on dates with them, you start going on overnights, you start having sexual relationship, right? And that's not, no one is doing anything wrong. No one is having a wildly different trajectory, but they're a little different and you're having very different relationships despite having similar relationships on paper. And people often don't anticipate that any of that might happen when all they've done is say, well, our rules were about the pacing of those early steps that we were nervous about.
Yeah.
So like those sorts of things I think are not, when people look at just the practical steps that they might take to avoid individual things they might be jealous about, they perhaps then miss nuances that they couldn't know until they have a first experience.
Yeah.
And so my biggest advice, which is about to be the question I ask you, The next topic we were going to talk about were what were practical things we thought we could advise people around jealousy. And my biggest advice to people is to not beat themselves up if they have experiences of jealousy, and to not assume that every experience you have of a jealous moment or a moment where you have a feeling around something and change a behavior are going to be the same as any other moment in your relationship. It's okay to have an experience, talk it out with your partner or partners, figure out what you need in that moment, and not assume that that will transfer forward to any other relationship in your life. Who you are at a given moment changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like that's something that I've seen in sometimes in people, especially if one partner is very like likes to talk out their feelings and the another partner is not a talking out feelings person. People do get really anxious about not being able to match their personal experience of a relationship with another relationship that their partner is having. Like I definitely had that in at times when I saw people, my partner, I think I had a partner at the time who was like, I don't have any other relationships. I'm like, dude, you literally have like two other people that you're seeing. Like these are your partners. And my partner was like, well, I don't consider them to be partners. Whereas if they were in my life in that same vein, they would definitely be partners to me. So it's that kind of a thing where you're not always going to be able to completely mesh everything together and make it make sense to each other, because your subjective experience of what a relationship is and means, even when you're both polyamorous, isn't necessarily always going to match. So that's a really good thing. I think in terms of like practical things, when it comes to jealousy, I think one thing I'd encourage people to do is don't feel bad about needing like some training wheels in some situations, right? Like one thing that I used to do is I'm not a big party person. I always end up dating people who are. And I always end up feeling like I'm the non-fun one because I don't want to go out and go to the club and blah blah blah. And there were times when I forced myself to do that, and that was a bad idea, because I wanted to be fun. And I do get a little bit anxious sometimes because I'm like, I'm not fun, I'm not the fun one. And so sometimes when my partner would go out to things, go out to on date nights or go out to club stuff, we'd do a good night call. And that would make me feel a little bit better. We didn't put any hard rules around it. It wasn't like you have to call me before you go to, but it was like I would appreciate a good night call. It made me feel a little bit better. If they were in the middle of like a private date, that's fine. It was usually more of when they were like out at a club or like a convention or a big event or something like that. I just appreciated it because I felt really nervous and really scared about, and insecure about not being the fun one. As our relationship developed, I needed that less and less. Like after a while, I was just like, whatever, have a good time. Bye bye. That's fine. But sometimes having those little training wheels can help a little bit. And I feel like you might be in polyamory communities where that's kind of shunned and where people might be like, well, that's really controlling. And I think if you demand it and you make it a big deal and you turn it, because you're also shooting yourself in the foot a little bit if you do that, because there might be any number of reasons why they may forget to call. And the bigger of a deal you make of it, the bigger of a deal it becomes. But I think, having things like that are okay, like are not a big deal. I think, if you want to do things where you practice some, even I really advise people against permission, like asking for permission before you're allowed to be in a relationship or allowed to go out on a date, because I just feel like you've already given permission, like, and it makes it weird for the permission giver as well, because it then feels like, well, if I have a bad feeling about this later, I'm not allowed to say anything because I've given my permission, but if you need a check-in, if for you a check-in is really important, a heads up is really important of something like, oh, if you want to get a text or something that's like, just so you know, like I'm gonna spend the night with this new person. That I think is if that's helpful, if it's not anxiety inducing and isn't something that's gonna like you're gonna see that and then you're gonna spend all night miserable, then that's fine as well. Like I think as long as you can be super flexible around it, not make anything a really big deal, I think that helps. I also think another practical thing that really helped me during times when like my partner was out on dates or I was really worried and like having those thoughts of like, oh, I'm going to be replaced because I'm not fun, blah, blah, blah. I used to buy a bunch of cards and like greeting cards from stores. And I used to, whenever I felt really nervous, I would write to my partner on like write them a card, and I would focus on like all of the positive things that had happened in our relationship. And I wasn't knowingly doing this. It's like actually like a gratitude practice, but I didn't realize it. But it's sitting down thinking about like, I'm really grateful that you're in my life, and like here's the things that we've done this past week that I've really liked. And that really helped me a lot. Like it kind of took my mind away from like the what ifs and the negative what ifs, and more focused on the positive aspects of our relationship, which really, really helped me. Because gratitude is a practice that I've always really struggled with. I've come from a background where I was basically told like, you have nothing to complain about, like, and if you are unhappy, then you're ungrateful. So the concept of being grateful has been very loaded for me. So I think that was a good way for me to access a gratitude practice without it being called a gratitude practice, and in a way that was really, really helpful. And it's kind of an approach that I use in general throughout like my life. If I'm feeling anxious about something, I'll think about, okay, let's think about the gratitude of it. So I think those two things can be really, really helpful whenever you're kind of dealing with really intense like anxiety about something, and also just giving yourself a break. You really can't beat yourself up into having no emotion. Like that's not going to work. The tough love stuff doesn't work. The whole like be a man up and like it doesn't work. You have to have self-compassion, because and also I really encourage people, like whenever people write me and they're like, I know this isn't logical, I'm like, it is logical. It is very logical. Please stop telling yourself that your feelings are illogical. Emotions are there for a reason. We didn't just evolve them to be stupid. Like, and I'm not saying that everything that's evolved is smart necessarily, but like it's panicking because it's trying to protect you. And even if it's misfiring at the wrong times, or if it's not particularly helpful for you in this moment, there is a logic to it. So by you telling yourself that your emotions are illogical, that's not really helping you, because you're just kind of, it's just a side way to insult yourself. So, I mean, think about it. If you were like talking to someone and they were like, oh, you're just being illogical, like that would be an insult. So give yourself a little bit of credit. You're having these feelings for a reason, and it's not because you're trying to punish yourself, and it's not because you're illogical. It's because it's for a lot of different reasons. So allow yourself to at least have them, and then at least you can process them.
Right. And like if it's a situation where you can access like soothing physical practices, even if it's just for yourself, helping yourself get out of a dysregulated state a little bit, if you're doing the thing where it is an evening where you're at home alone and you're spiraling a little bit, can be helpful. I used to keep for several years under my bed what I called a FOMO box of like distraction tactics, and a little journal filled with pages of reminders of things that I could be doing that like were those uh, yoga sequences and physical tactics that I would use to calm myself down, and a list of movies that I would want to watch and what streaming services they were on. It used to be filled with DVDs, but during the years I was keeping this, we moved out of the era where things were on a DVD player and into the streaming years, So, like, those sorts of things to help move yourself out of, I am hyper focused on this thing about my partner, and into, I am doing some things that are good for me and myself. Because sometimes, yes, going into a gratitude practice of what is good about my relationship can really help you in the moment. And sometimes you can't move yourself all the way there in that same evening. And where you can move yourself to is, I'm going to give myself a big giant hug. I'm going to do a yoga sequence that ends in happy baby and chill myself out for a little while. And then I'm going to watch a movie and eat some Chinese food and like get myself into a physically regulated, like I feel a little warm and fuzzy and I can go to bed like this, and I can deal with the actual processing of this in the morning. In the morning, I'll be in a place where I can do a little bit of a gratitude practice. I can have a check-in with my partner about the things that I think are good about our relationship, but let them know I was kind of dysregulated about this last night. Can they reassure me a little bit that they also think these things that are good about our relationship?
Yeah, 100%. And it's okay if you feel a little silly. Sometimes whenever I started doing like physical things,
Yeah.
like I was like, oh, I feel a little silly doing this. But it does really, really help, like especially some of the physical stuff, like especially if you're mentally like you can't think, you're just kind of spiraling, those things are really, really helpful.
Right. And if I'm totally spiraling and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm totally spiraling, I need to figure out what I'm doing the like what the grounding exercises of like what can you feel, see, touch.
Yeah.
I don't even keep track of the numbers and when I'm first doing them because I'm usually so dysregulated when I remember to do it that like
Hmm.
just one of each to start. And then I can do the thing where I sit down like I'm in a yoga class and I move my butt out of the way to start doing it. And I giggle at myself because I have to move my fat butt out of the way. And it's funny and I enjoy it. Right? Like enjoying
Hmm.
that tiny bit of physical movement where you're like connecting with the space and yourself to try to bring the emotion into a part of your body where you're aware of where it is,
Hmm.
really start the process of like, okay, I can feel this move in me and I'm a little more in control of it. Because a lot
Hmm.
of times what's scary about jealousy is that it feels like it's running you
Mm.
instead of you just experiencing a thing. Right. And I think
Yeah.
for a lot of us, we're conditioned that that's okay, that we feel it that intensely because intensity of jealousy proves the intensity of our love or whatever. Like that's one of
Yeah.
those monogamous myths that runs around that a lot of us still have stuck in the back of our heads there. And so getting to let that go and getting it to be allowed to wash out of us through doing these sorts of things can really feel a little better.
100%. Yeah.
Um, And from that, I guess we move sort of neat. I'm accidentally moving neatly into the next topic a couple of times. How cute.
It's just because you're like a very talented MC.
Accidentally. How do you tell if you're not able to do non-monogamy or you're just experiencing strong emotions, right? Because I know that that's a question that people ask themselves and ask us a fair bit of the time, right? How do I know if this is
Hmm.
a this isn't for me or I'm just having big feelings?
I think one of the things I try to get people to think about, because big feelings are going to happen. Like I don't think there are probably people. I mean, there's billions of people on the planet. I'm sure there are people who take to non-monogamy like a duck to water and are just like, I'm cool, I'm fine, no problems here. And that's great. I think the vast majority of people are going to have some level of anxiety. And I think that to assume that you have any anxiety that you're not cut out for polyamory is not the case. I think the first thing that's really practical to ask yourself is, if you've been in monogamous relationships all your life, could you be in a monogamous relationship with someone who had a time intensive career or hobby to the point where they didn't spend a large amount of their time with you? And I think that's a really good question to ask because theoretically, there are probably people who don't have any jealousy issues or don't necessarily experience strong emotions at the thought of their partner being with someone else, but they don't want to have less time with someone. Their ideal lifestyle situation is one in which they have the vast majority of the time that they spend is with a romantic partner. And that's perfectly legit and that's fine. So I think first, like practically before you get into all the emotions of the things, because I think if you're not getting that time and you want that time, then the emotions will definitely come. So I think that the first thing to ask is like, okay, are you okay with less time? And why are you okay with less time? Is it because you're super independent? You like your own space? Is it because you want to fill that time with other relationships? And that's like the journey to finding what I call your anchor. It's like the personal reason why you have an interest in trying polyamory. For a lot of people, that interest is going to be to keep the relationship that they have. Like that
Mhm.
is going to be a major motivator. However, in the exact same way that you can't always switch to a long distance relationship to save an in person relationship, if long distance doesn't work for you, you can't switch to a polyamorous relationship to save a monogamous relationship if polyamory doesn't work for you. So, there are lots of reasons why some people can't do long distance. Some people can, some people can't. And you can try to be in a long distance relationship to kind of save it, but I think a lot more people can wrap their heads around why that wouldn't necessarily work and why it's not a failing of anyone personally involved. And I think that non-monogamy is much the same thing. So if you feel like, okay, I can deal with less time, I'm fine with that, like that's not the issue. I think if that's fine for you, if that sits okay with you, then I think I would pay attention to how the feelings are developing over time. and what sort of things trigger those feelings, and are you actually addressing the triggers of those feelings? Because I think one thing that I noticed, like in new relationships, I would definitely feel super anxious about stuff. I was much more anxious around, relationships that my partner had where I could directly compare myself to the person. And also, like, being a non-binary person, I had a lot of gender feels. If my partner was dating a woman, I was like, oh well, I'm a diet woman, I'm Coke Zero woman, and they're gonna find the real woman and they're gonna dump me, the diet woman. Like, I had those feelings. So, like, do those feelings change over time? Are you noticing that, as they go out more and more, does it feel like it's moving in a direction where it's a little bit more manageable, or you feel like you're building trust? And I think it is difficult because, like, just like relationship advice, like any relationship, you could get relationship advice from Esther Perel. And if you are in an abusive relationship, it's not going to freaking work. Any good relationship advice will not work if the other person doesn't have your best interests at heart. So, in some of my advice columns, when some people, it's so sad when some people come to me and they describe a partner who is essentially just got permission to do polyamory and just does whatever the F they want, doesn't really care about any boundaries, hasn't had any discussions about anything, isn't at all sensitive to their partner's needs whatsoever. And then the person comes to me and is like, how do I get better at being polyamorous? I'm bad at being polyamorous. And I'm like, no, the Iranian yogurt is not the issue here. It's your partner. Like, please. So it's difficult, and it can't, and you may need to reach out to polyamorous communities. You may need to find a polyamorous social circle. That's one of the reasons why abusive people, one of the first things they try to do is isolate that person from their social circle, because when you're in it, it's very hard for you to be an accurate judge of the situation. So when you kind of can go to other people and talk about it, and they're like, I don't know, that's really, really helpful. So I think it's not always an easy tell. I think if you feel more regulated as you build that trust with your partner, that is a good sign that, like, okay, it's just kind of the newness and building that trust that can be really helpful. But if it's something where, like, if you can say to yourself, like, and it requires a little bit of self-reflection, and you may not know, but if you can say to yourself, like, this is a lifestyle, like, I can imagine what my ideal polyamorous situation is. I can talk with my partner, find out what their ideal situation is. We can come to a compromise, and we can come to an amount of time that we share together. That's also something that's going to decrease anxiety, because sometimes people don't have those conversations. They just go, okay, we're polyamorous now. And then they also have to deal with their partner, I'm kind of diverging, but this is another thing that I think is really important. Whenever you decide, okay, we're opening our relationship, I think you need to decide, okay, how do other people factor in? Because it's not just like, okay, we're opening our relationship, it's open, blah, blah, blah. And then they just go on behaving as if they're monogamous still until somebody gets a date. And then they're thinking of their schedule. No, think about your schedule now. Think about how many partners do you want to have? Like, you may not know, it may, but think about it. Think about the practical time and spend time apart, especially if you live together. Spend time apart. And that will really, really help. Go ahead.
There's a great article called The Most Skipped Step in Opening Up that was popular for a while, that I don't know if it's still popular on the internet. That is basically about that idea of that if you already live together, you should be trying to spend independent time separately before anyone starts going on dates, just to get used to spending the time apart, because so many monogamous people don't spend the time apart. If you're dramatically independent people who have your own separate hobbies, who are only spending a couple of date nights together, maybe this doesn't apply to you. But if you're monogamous people who are only spending those couple of date nights apart, and you're intending to keep every one of those separate hobbies still, and so you're going from 2 date nights to 1, and that's going to potentially hurt your feelings about your relationship, you need to talk about that when you decide to open up.
Yeah. 100%.
So, like, those are actually important considerations. And also, if one of you is dreaming of, we're going to open up, we're going to date together, we're going to find our beautiful third and ride off into the sunset of building a, like, joint household a year and a half after we meet that person, and the other one is going, we're opening up, we're going to date separately, we're each going to find relatively casual relationships that may ebb and flow and come and go over the next 5 or 10 years, and live our basically identical looking monogamous life from here on forward. you need to have conversations about what those castles in the air are. Because if they're dramatically different ones, your needs are going to diverge. And it's going to be the same kind of irreconcilable difference that it would be if you were talking about having children and not having children, right? Because at some point, those actual humans that you're dating are going to have feelings about these choices that one or the other of you is making plans and promises about as you move forward.
100%. And that, like, not getting that time, if you wait to spend time apart, and then you suddenly not only have to deal with the fear and anxiety of your partner dating someone new, and then also mourning the time that you're losing. Like, that's time lost. It's okay to be sad about that, especially if you don't have a date. Like, people will often do this like polyamory chicken game with each other, where it's like, I have a date, you have a date yet? We have a date, we have to have the date at the same time. Like, it's not feasible. Like, you're not both going, I mean, maybe you will, but it's very unlikely that both of you are going to find new partners at the exact same time, and your schedules are just going to align. Like, that's probably not going to happen. So as much as you can get used to that time apart, then you're not overwhelmed with so many different feelings. And the other thing you brought up that's also really, really important, like I've said, like, just because you're both polyamorous doesn't mean you're compatible in terms of your polyamory. Just like two monogamous people are not always compatible in terms of the monogamy they want to practice, right? So you need to figure out as well, like, and it's very possible one of you, and I've seen this a lot, one of you might want to have super casual relationships. You're not super interested in actually having tons of well established relationships or whatever, and then the other one of you is more interested in maybe having only one other partner that's super long term. And there's no wrong way or right way to do any of this, and sometimes people end up clashing heads because they're really confused because their partner's like much more of a casual person and going out, and then they see that as having so many different relationships that they would have. It's that mismatch again of like not understanding what relationships subjectively mean with each other that then ends up creating so much anxiety. So you got to talk about what kind of polyamory you want to practice.
Yeah, and it can resolve perfectly well if you guys come to an understanding, but it can also lead to a lot of judgment and resentment when you don't resolve it or when you wait to talk about it until you're in some kind of conflict about something else in your relationship. Because then if it comes up while you're in conflict about something else, it comes out in the worst way possible, right? And someone says something to the other and it comes out in a shamey way or a negative way or a I just really don't get it. What are you even doing? Like blah, 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 word vomit. And then you're in a bad space with one another.
Yeah.
And it's not worth it, you know?
I've definitely been shamey accidentally as a person who, I don't do super casual things. That's not really me. And, trying to negotiate sexual health rules with partners who are more casual and being a little bit frustrated because I'm like, why do you got to do this? And it comes out in a really shitty and judgmental way. And I've had to apologize for that because, I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm just frustrated about our differences and how we see things and how we decide to make decisions. And that's okay. I can be frustrated by that, but I don't have to express it like a jerk.
Yeah, it is one of those things where when you're coming from vastly different places on a spectrum, it can be hard to find an appropriate compromise sometimes. Or sometimes the answer isn't a compromise, it's meeting one person's comfort level, not in necessarily like the number of partners you have, but in the way you do certain protection things or whatever. And getting there without being disrespectful of one another in the way you talk about it can be extremely challenging.
Oh yeah. And that's one area actually. Sorry to keep dragging, but one area where a partner called my bluff, which I think is really, really important, is I wanted to make a rule, more or less, where I was like, why don't you like wait until you've known someone for a week before you sleep with them? And my partner was like, well, what difference does that make in terms of STI prevention and risk? Are the STIs going to wait and be like, and after a week be like, there's no sex happening here, we'll just go? Like, that's not how STIs work. Right. And I was like, oh, That's true.
Right.
I'm wrong. And we had to negotiate, and we renegotiated a lot of our boundaries around, I have a disability that involves I'm somewhat immunocompromised. So my anxiety about the situation was because of that, and not wanting to deal with like another condition that I might have to manage. So we ended up coming to a place where between us, we would utilize the most protection possible. And then, there would still be regular testing, and that really helps, like coming to those conclusions. Instead of trying to control what they did, we were able to control what happened in between us, which was much, much better.
Yeah, sometimes it's about figuring out where your locus of control is and then taking that control for yourself. And that's
Mhm.
not usually people's first assumption when opening up from monogamy, because monogamy puts so much focus on, well, as soon as you're monogamous, of course you're using no protection between you. And of course that's a sign of trust. And of course, if they trust you, you won't be doing that. And those sorts of normative thoughts and structures can really bleed over into
Mhm.
polyamorous relating, even though people don't intend them to. And
Mhm.
it can be a little hard to unpack that and to roll back from it.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
so that's just kind of a practical like consideration that I think doesn't often come up for people until they meet their first partner who has an immunocompromised person in their network, or until they end up having enough casual partners that it becomes a concern, or
Mhm.
they're like some people in my polycule who host kind of biggish sex parties where we have policies, right?
Mhm.
Like these things come up
Yeah.
eventually. But I guess we've been going through some practical things people can think about when opening a relationship, which was
Mhm.
one of my headings here. Um, are there any additional practical things you want to sort of suggest for folks before we move on to the next thing on my list?
Um, I mean, I one of the things that I do like about, and one of the reasons why I did write my book, not to be like all pluggy, but
Yeah,
one of
yeah.
the reasons why I did write the non-monogamy journal was
Mhm.
because, again, like I said, so many people watch films and they consume a lot of media that has all of these kind of different relationship scenarios in them, and they can kind of place themselves mentally in those different relationship scenarios. Whereas like there isn't, unless you consume a lot of polyamory media and a lot of like help advice and things like that. And I did, and I still was unprepared for a lot of things. You don't really know how you would react in some situations, and sometimes the shock of that situation is a lot to deal with, as well as trying to figure out where you stand. So one of the reasons why I put together the journal was so that people could go through some of these situations. Some of them are more likely than others. Some of them may be very random, but I think like figuring out like having that, like going through things like that might be really helpful. And if you don't have that access, then I would definitely like really do try to find some good polyamory communities. I know it's very much a postcode lottery in terms of like some communities are better than others. Some local communities may not be very good places. There are some online communities. Just I think it's always good for you to have a community at least that you can go to ask questions, because like people around you who are your friends who are not non-monogamous may feel not super equipped to help you, and it's not because they don't want to, and they may end up saying things like, oh, this is because you're in an open relationship, even if they don't necessarily mean it. So I think definitely very practical thing is see if you can find some people that you can go to with some of these problems, because I think that sometimes just not having anyone to ask, and it being such a new scenario can sometimes be just add to the challenge.
Right. I want to get the degree more specific and note that it should be
Mm.
someone who you're not dating and who is not dating
Yeah.
anyone you're dating. Right? Because
Yes.
the thing of you've gotten involved in local community only through your partners and metamors, and you're asking your metas for advice about your partner, and that has its own value, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same as talking to people who are not dating anyone you're dating about whether or not this feels right.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's extra value there. One other little practical point that I want to make.
Mm-hmm.
My book is mostly about folks who are a little further along in their non-monogamous journey, who are trying to move in together or who have moved in together and building like the maps in the Here There Be Dragons world of non-monogamy, for folks in those spaces about how other people have done it. But there's a chapter on finances that I think includes some stuff that's relevant even to folks who are just starting out, because the idea of where is the money for your dates coming from, is a topic that comes up in coaching for me with folks who are new to non-monogamy really frequently. Because people have so many feelings about how much their partners spend on dates, or how much their partners are treated for on dates by third-party partners, or things like this. And it is not infrequent for someone to come in and be like, well, I don't want to pay for you to have sex with someone else, right? Because even though you're not like hiring a sex worker, you're out of communal money paying for your partner to take someone on a very nice date, at the end of which sexuality is occurring, and you're uncomfy about that, maybe. So for some people, the answer is figuring out some amount of money that is discretionary spending for each of you that you're not looking at or you're not deeply thinking about, that is roughly equivalent for each of you. Or if you're already in a like part joint, part not joint finances, making sure that there's some money for each of you that you're not having overview on, that is for dating maybe each other as well as others, so that it doesn't feel bad later when your dates aren't as nice as other people's dates or whatever. No, our dates are just as nice as other people's dates, and it's all coming out of the fun money spending. We're not neglecting our dates just to do household things because we put our dates in the essential spending pot, right? Thinking about things like that and thinking forward about them can be kind of helpful, right? There's also gendered imbalances in that just because of how we typically pay for dates, right? It's not a hard and fast rule in polyamorous circles to the degree that it is in monogamous circles, but it still generally is. I say, as someone who has been going on a lot of first dates this year, and when I'm out with other women, we tend to take turns treating. And when I'm out with men, like I'm bisexual and date across gender spectra. And when I'm dating with women and non-binary people, we tend to take turns treating each other. And when I'm out with men, unless it's an established relationship, they almost always are rushing to put down a card. Right? And that, I don't know if it's just my age, right? I'm almost 40 and the people I'm dating are in their 40s almost always. Or if it's just a cultural thing that still persists. But it's enough that I'm willing, between that and the things I hear in coaching that follow the same pattern, I'm willing to say there is still a gendered pattern at play, that men are paying for more things, and then men and women have different costs, right? Women are spending more on like personal upkeep in various ways, and men are spending more on the date. And we're both going to complain about all of these things if you're in a heterosexual relationship.
And there's definitely like a division of household labor as well that
yeah.
I mean, that goes into it.
The most common reason that people get divorced is chores. In monogamous relationships, as well as the biggest reason for split ups in my survey of 3+ adult households. Like, people break up because you don't want to equitably divide how you're doing this labor.
Interesting,
right?
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of tools and ideas of how to redivide these things. If you haven't heard of Fair Play by Eve Rodsky, it's a book about redividing these ideas and making sort of more visible what the things that it actually takes to run your household are, and makes a little game of how you split them up. If you don't want to make it a little game, you can just make lists and then split up tasks. But the labor of actually making the list, of every week noticing what's missing, and then letting
who does
you
that
know
fall
what
on?
you have to do. Who does it typically fall on? Usually women.
Yeah.
Traditionally. And studies show that usually when women get married and usually when women have kids, they get increases in their labor regardless of whether they're working or not. And regardless of how many hours they're working, and regardless of who makes more money. And polyamorous people are not exempt from this. And if everyone is also trying to go out around this, it doesn't make that less. It often makes it more because you're trying to keep the house presentable for new people coming over.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a
or people
thing.
have different standards about that.
Yeah, yeah. So many practical things like you cover in your book that definitely. I'm so glad you brought up the finance issue in as well.
I mean, the things that are useful for folks who are new in my book are these kinds of practical issues. What it is
Mhm.
for folks who are more established is this idea of like a roadmap of things you might want or not want for yourself once you see the different ways that other folks have constructed their households. So
Yeah.
I think it's valuable sort of no matter where you are in your journey. If you think you might ever choose to move in with more than one other person,
Mhm.
it addresses both having been previously partnered and coming from a position of like three or more individuals all moving in together, and gives sort of advice for mitigating power imbalances if you are in a configuration where previously there were two of you in a space and someone else moves in, or if you all move into another place. Uh,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's my little shameless plug.
I know it's fine. It's good. I think especially because we might run out of time, I think we should get to the Q&A
Q&A.
question we have.
Yeah.
Did you want to read it or I don't know how accessible it is on the phone.
I can read it out loud for you.
It's
There we
totally
go.
up to you.
And I'll just also
So,
go ahead and plug to folks who are in the room with us that we really would love to hear from you. We've got kind of a quiet
Yes.
audience today, so I know we've got at least one Q&A in the stack, but definitely would love to hear more. It doesn't have to be a question. It can also just be feedback or other perspectives, but definitely chime in.
yes. So the first question in the Q&A says, I'm an asexual romantic, finding it hard to attract another poly person because I don't fit in. Is there advice or groups that are accepting of asexual individuals who want to be in poly relationships? And I will click the answer live button for us.
Yeah, I have um super like this is my experience, to be honest with you. Like I'm on the asexual spectrum. I would say that I don't get attracted to people very often. Um and I actually wrote an article about it called The Hierarchy That Polyamorous People Don't Talk About, which is about how if you're asexual in a lot of polyam communities and you don't want to have sex immediately, you often kind of just get thrown to the side and people don't want to invest time in you. It really depends on the community, I find. Like I have heard really good things about some communities, but I've definitely experienced where, it just seems like I'm not judging people. However, they want to do their business is their business. That's fine. But it just felt like to me that it's almost like, okay, I'm polyamorous, you're polyamorous, we've met once at a party, let's shag. And I'm just like, I like just because I'm polyamorous doesn't mean that I'm ready to sleep with you just because you're polyamorous. And even if we may be attracted to each other, like I would like to go out on one date at least, for God's sakes. Like, and that's not always true for every single person, but I definitely understand how you feel. I think that I would search around different groups, to be honest with you, because in my experience in the polyamory community that I was, there was the community with like the events, like the official events, right?
Mhm.
And I didn't necessarily always jive very well in those events. I didn't really fit in very well with those events, even at stuff like BiCon, and like I am bisexual as well, and pansexual, however you want to define it, I'm queer, but um even at those events, like it still had that kind of vibe of like, hey, I'm bi, you're bi, and it's like that's fine. It's just that I'm not like, sometimes you can feel a little bit like you're the wet blanket, and that's not fun, right? So I think try to find other different types of groups. I'd check out queer groups if you're queer. I'd check out like different hobby groups, to be honest with you, because I have found polyam people not in polyam groups, and they've been people who don't fit into the main group as well. I'd also consider like seeing if you want to start your own group, seeing if there's an ace group, and then there might also be some polyam people in there too. Because I honestly think that, especially for like ace people, we probably experience a lot of times in relationships dealing with like that sexual incompatibility and feeling pressured by monogamy to be like super super hypersexual when we're not to say all monogamous people are hypersexual, but like you there are probably, I feel like in general with any any minority community, like open relationships are super way more common in the queer community than they are in the straight community, right?
Mhm.
I think neurodivergent people are way more likely to be polyamorous than people who are not. Like there's a trend there. And I think if you go into any of those other sub communities, you might find that people are a little bit more open and accepting. And I would also be like super honest on your dating profiles and stuff and be like, I am ace and I am polyamorous, but I am ace, and just be aware of that. There are polyam people who will be respectful of you. There really are, and some of them, like I said, I always tend to end up dating like the social butterflies and stuff like that, and the people who go to parties, people who you might assume because they're super casual with everyone else that they will demand that from you, but they don't always. So yeah, that's like I just try different communities and try different things and just be really upfront and honest. And if that scares those people away, then they're crappy people, to be honest with you. Because I think that there are a lot of polyam people. There might be people who kind of assume sex is like gonna be the thing right away just because that's been their habit. But I do think that quite a lot of polyam people, the people who are decent people, if you sort of go like, okay, it's not on the table for me, and they'll be like, oh, okay, like I think a lot of people will actually be pretty decent. Cool.
Okay. Oh, I clicked the wrong button.
It's
Right.
okay.
There we go.
No worries. I'm glad it was helpful.
Great.
And you're not
Laura,
alone,
you should
by
be
the
able to.
way.
There we go.
Well, we don't have any other questions in the Q&A right now. So I'm wondering if y'all would be willing to share a little bit about other projects that you're currently working on or where people can find more of your work.
You go first, Laura.
Okay. On Tuesday, I'm teaching a class based on the book Monogamy in This Economy. That the tickets for that are on Eventbrite at inthiseconomy.eventbrite.com. If anybody wants to come. And then you can find me on Instagram at Ready for Polyamory. I'm on all the social media as that if folks want to find me.
Cool. So yeah, I have, as you've already seen, like the Anxious Person's Guide, which you can't see because it's blurred out. There you go. And then the Non-Monogamy Journal. I'm also going to be releasing in August this year a book called Supporting Someone Polyamorous. So it's going to be a book that you can give to family members, like anyone who's asking kind of like the beginner questions, and you're like, oh, I've got to explain this. I really don't want to have this conversation, and they mean well, but you're just like, ugh. It's going to be something you can give to them. Like literally the index is going to be like those questions that you get, like, what about the children and everything? And you can just give it to them, and hopefully it will help you a little bit in those discussions. I'm also trying to, and I'm going to be doing a course. So all of that kind of practical stuff, I really feel passionately that the advice that people are given, like the polyamory PhD, to just read for 6 months. And again, I'm not saying don't read, because obviously I wrote books, that'd be stupid of me. But like that advice of like read for 6 months and don't do any work, and then you will do the polyamory correctly, is not very good. And so I'm putting together something called the Polyamory Fast Track, which is designed to be an audio-based course where you can actually start putting in practical steps right away, and it's self-paced, so you can do it at your own pace. And you can find all of this stuff at my website, non-monogamyhelp.com. And I also put out columns of podcasts every week. And you feel free to send me a question if you'd like as well. If you have any questions, I don't charge for answering questions. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, this talk has been really delightful, and I think will be a great resource for folks both who are in the room and watching later. Is there anything else that y'all want to share before we sign off today?
Laura, do you want to go
No,
first?
I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Only thing that I would say, especially during these times periods, is another big passion of mine is death positivity and challenging people to talk about death, because talking about sex won't get you pregnant and talking about death won't kill you. If you are in the US and you have not got an advance directive and made obvious your wishes known to your family, especially if you are trans, especially if you have family that you don't gel with, please look up. Caitlin Doty has a whole video about advance directives. Please make sure you have an advance directive because that is really, really important.
That's a fantastic additional note. And for folks who are in our area, we have a monthly queer affirming free community notary service that happens at Firestorm. So drop in and you can work on your advanced directives with friends who will help you in that. Well, y'all, this has been really delightful. Thank you again so much, Lola and Laura, for taking time out of your day to share some of this knowledge. And I hope that we get a chance to connect again for another event.
Yeah.
Thank you for
super
having me.
awesome.
Awesome. Take care, y'all.
All right. Bye.